DJ PK and Dustin Smith joins us, founder of QB Elite and Spanish Fork High School's football coach. Dustin, welcome back to the show.
Hey, guys. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Obviously, the world of college football has gotten super entertaining here in the offseason with the coaching carousel touching down, Kyle Whittingham to Michigan, Morgan Scalley, tons of assistant coaches moving, dominoes falling at other schools. I'm curious in all that's been written and said, as someone who has some access to some of the scuttlebutt and has probably heard stuff from some pretty good sources. Do you think any part of this story in your mind has been missed or hasn't been told, I don't know, loudly enough?
What I think is the most fascinating thing to me, I mentioned somebody or heard somebody on your show, might have been you, David, a couple of days ago bring it up. It's the trickle-down effect of this and how it really has affected so many other schools. And you know, I think that the part that I personally believe is being maybe not talked about as much is the loss. In fact, I think PK touched on it in your last segment. I caught the last part of that, and that is the loss of Coach Harding from Utah. I think is something that in all of the movement and all of the things that have happened and so much talk on the head coaches and offensive coordinators and things, that offensive line coach it's so important. And Coach Harding, in the 2024 fall, I had the top recruit in the state. He was the Gatorade Player of the Year down at Spanish Fork High School, and he was an offensive lineman. And he had committed to Utah and then decommitted and went to USC. So I was able to meet with Coach Harding as well as with most of the head coaches and offensive line coaches around the country. They were all after this kid. And Coach Harding is a heck of a coach and a heck of a recruiter. And, you know, I know that Jordan Gross is I assume he's a good coach. I can't say I know that. I know he's a good football player. But that is going to be something that Utah, I think, is going to see right out of the gate is, will the offensive line do what they've done and be as effective as they've been when they've got a new scheme and a new personality, and can they keep that momentum up front? Because without offensive linemen, the quarterback play, the running game, passing game, none of it really matters if you don't have a solid offensive line. So he's the one that I think, you know, he's a heck of a coach that I think Utah is going to really miss.
When someone makes it out of a community, that person then becomes a legend in that community, right? If it's a small town or a smaller player or whatever, and goes on and plays in the big leagues, the NFL, NBA, he becomes sort of a hero for that community that he left. Like Mike Weir being a golfer from Canada. The guy's a hero in the entire country. He won the Masters. And where I'm going with this is one of your own, a high school coach, goes from high school to college head coach, Eric Kjar at Corner Canyon to obviously Weber State. Now he needs to start recruiting high school kids. Obviously, you wanted to beat him if you ever played him. There's no question about that. And there might have been some jealousy with all the winning. But is now he the standard for high school coaches? And then when he goes to recruit in the state, he's going to get a lot of love because he's, like I say, one of your own.
Yeah. And the thing about Eric is I don't think anybody in the state has anything but just happiness and excitement for him and his success. And no, I never wanted to play Corner Canyon. I didn't want to. That wouldn't have gone well. But he is a great coach. I've known him for a lot of years, going back to when he was at Jordan, and he is going to have, I think, he's going to be a great recruiter. And he just added Isaac Asiata, I know, as his offensive line coach. I coached Isaac in high school. I've known him since he was 14. Another kid who's going to relate really well with the boys in Utah. Eric's going to do a great job up at Weber State. I think coaches respect him. So when he comes into the school and wants to talk to kids, he gets it, and I think he's going to be able to pick up on a lot of these Utah kids that are getting missed nowadays because of how hard it is to be a high school kid and to be recruited to, you know, a big Division I school. The BYU and Utah, even Utah State, those schools, they really don't pay a whole lot of attention to the high schools now. I mean, they do, but it's third or fourth in the pecking order when they're looking for a kid. There's so many other kids they can they can go to before a high school kid, which means there's going to be kids who may have been a BYU or Utah State caliber kid, 10 years ago, who's going to be missed, and he's going to have to go to a smaller school and show it there and then leave. The real test for Eric, for all these schools at, the Utah Tech and SUU is building a program when you know that if you find that kid who's maybe the diamond in the rough or that kid that everybody missed on and you develop him and he turns into be a good player, that he's going to be gone. So you're never going to – I don't know how you're ever going to really – develop a program when the kids you're really relying on to win are constantly going to be jumping to, can they get to a bigger school and make some money? So, but we'll see. He's going to do great up there, though. He's a great coach.
Can those schools help themselves by getting the kids in the portal who haven't landed? We hear about all the kids stranded there. There must be some kids there who could play at the Big Sky level, because whatever these schools are going through, Montana State are going through it. People are getting recruited off the Dakota rosters, whether it's North Dakota State, South Dakota State, whoever. They're all going through it.
Yeah, and the programs who can do that, the programs who can do that and who can find those high school kids who were the caliber of, like I said earlier, maybe a BYU or a Utah 10 years ago. If you're not a 4-star, 5-star type kid now, if you're not ready to play as a freshman, then you're really not of interest, to these guys. They need a guy that can play now, or they'll just go find a guy in a portal that's ready. So those guys that, 10 years ago you might have brought in and redshirted him and let him develop a little bit, they're going to have to go and try it out at a lower school. And so if those kids can maybe improve faster, and they can hit it in the portal with some of those guys that you mentioned that maybe aren't. Look at a McKay Hillstead type kid, for example. Now, he just, I believe, committed back to Utah State.
Right.
But McKay is one of those kids who's bounced around, who probably, if he had ended up at Bronson Barron did that down at SUU. He went out, he was at Weber State. He went out to Western Kentucky, didn't work, came back, landed at SUU and had a really good year. And I think McKay would have a really good year if he was at a Weber State or a Utah Tech or something. But I'm super happy for him at Utah State and hope he can thrive there. But there's kids like that are out there, and they're going to be at high demand. And Eric will do a great job, I think, at identifying those, because he knows who those kids are. He's coached those kids before, and there's so much talent just in Utah. If he'll just focus on the Utah kids, which I know he will, you can build a really good program around the Utah high school athletes who aren't going to the big-time college because of the difficulty in competing with the portal.
In terms of being recruiters, what do you think BYU is losing when Jay Hill and Guilford left?
A lot. I don't know Guilford as well. I've just heard things about him. I know Jay Hill very well, and Jay Hill's he's as good as they come at recruiting, and not only football. His ability to situational football coaching is something that I talk a lot about when I'm talking with coaches and players, and that's the ability to make calls during a game. Every defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator in a classroom, on a whiteboard or watching film can sound brilliant, but what you do in the 10 seconds you have to make a decision on a 3rd and 6 and being able to anticipate the situation and what's this offensive coordinator going to do here? What does he like to do? And making the right call. And Jay has always had that ability to, it seems like he's kind of a one step ahead, or he thinks like an offensive coordinator, which makes him a good defensive coordinator. But he's so good with the boys. He's just got the personality. He's going to be perfect out there at Michigan. So I think that's going to be a tough one. I think that Papinga's he's similar. I don't know him as well as a coordinator, obviously, but he'll recruit fine. But I think that's going to be the BYU defensive identity, which is something they've done such a good job at building and establishing these last couple of years. It's a bummer that they may have that may slip a little bit. I hope it doesn't. And then in the case of Utah, they finally found what I thought was an offense that was going to fit the style of defense that they play. and some guys that I think if they'd have stayed there, what they were doing with all the motions and shifting and, the athletic quarterback play, and they were scoring points and not just relying on pounding the ball and playing defense. So losing Beck and Harding, both the defense at BYU and the offense at Utah, it's going to be a makeover that I think we're all very interested to see, and hopefully it doesn't take a step back. But I'm afraid it's going to take a lot of work to keep it at the level they finished at this year, because both teams were really clipping there at the end of the season.
What did you think of the fit of McGiven going and joining Morgan Scalley as an offensive coordinator?
I know that I talked to Bryson Barnes a little bit up at Utah State, and him having been at Utah and at Utah State, he really liked him, and said that as a quarterback, he was the kind of guy that the quarterbacks will really like. He's hasn't had the big name as some of the guys out there in the country have, that I think Utah probably could have gone after. So I think Morgan is establishing very quickly that he wants guys that he knows and trusts, and he's not afraid to just keep it here local, and guys who have been around, and maybe guys who aren't really looking to move. He wants a guy that wants to be at Utah, which I think, Kevin or Coach McGiven is. I think offensively as a coach, what he was doing up there at Utah State, he had a similar style of quarterback in that he had a guy who could also run the ball, which, obviously Utah's QBs can do. So I think that's a good fit. I think he'll be fine at Utah. I actually think that he'll do a good job. Will they be able to get going early and be effective early in the year? Or is it going to take a whole season for guys to figure it out? Because if that's the case, then I get a little concerned specifically with Ficklin. Is he going to stick around? I was a little surprised that both of those guys stayed. I thought that, especially Ficklin, that after what he did, that he might say, hey, I don't want to just be a Wildcat guy, that he might have jumped. So, that'll be the big test for Coach McGiven, is can he keep both those QBs happy and so that they're both around in a year from now.
Now that his freshman season is over, I'm speaking, of course, of Bachmeier. I wanted your evaluation in terms of, I wouldn't say maybe certainly you were impressed, but what was your level of surprise that he was able to come in as a first-year kid and do what he did?
I was really surprised that he was able to do what he did. I mean, to come in as a freshman, and I think what we maybe sometimes forget is that he wasn't there for spring ball either. So
right.
To come in and to miss spring ball, and then to come in and to grasp the offense, and then it's one thing to grasp it, it's another thing to then be able to have it translate over to the field when your last real competition came with high school players, and he was playing good teams right away, and he had to be able to adjust and adapt quickly. And most freshmen, they'll have a handful of games where they get cooked because they're just not mentally ready, even physically, whatever. It's the mental and emotional side that they're just not ready to handle, and especially being a quarterback at BYU and following the quarterbacks that he followed out of BYU, there was a lot of pressure, and he came in and seemed like he just fit right in. And so I don't think that Coach Roderick, he simplified the offense, I'm guessing, and I think that it was obvious in some games that Bear was I think he might have been told who to look for and where to go with the ball, and they were trying to simplify it, which I think was smart, and it worked. They did just fine offensively. I think you hear sometimes people talk about, well, sophomore slump or something like that. He's not going to be worse next September. He's only going to be a better quarterback. Physically, he's going to be better. He's going to have more control he's going to feel more comfortable, more control of the offense. They're actually going to be able to open up the offense more and add more to it. So now whether or not he plays as well or plays better, there's so many variables that go into that at the quarterback position, because you can improve and be better as a quarterback. But, as we all know, football is the ultimate team sport. And I think oftentimes quarterbacks he didn't do as well as he did last year. He took a step back, and, he didn't really take a step back. He's just as good or better, but the receivers or the offensive line, there's other things that took a step back, and then that reflects oftentimes poorly on the quarterback play. So, if their run game can stay solid, they've got to fix a couple. They're going to miss a couple guys out at receiver. If they can fix those quickly, I think he'll have an even better year because Coach Roddick's going to be able to add more to the offense, and Bear can only be more comfortable. But what he did this year, having missed spring ball, what he did performance-wise on the field, but also just as a leader, he seemed very calm out there. He didn't get it too up or too down. He handled the media well. So I think BYU fans have, a lot to be excited about with him coming back. It's the other positions that, and as we talked about, the defense that I think is the areas that, really need to be focused on. Bear will be fine.
Dustin Smith joining us, founder of QB Elite and Spanish Fork High School football coach. As football has evolved here, when I got here, high school games used to go about 2 hours and 10 minutes. They ran the ball. There were guys getting recruited, but they weren't quarterbacks. And that has changed, and games now go 2 hours and 45 minutes, and there seem to be pretty good high school quarterbacks everywhere and a few guys who can advance on and play college football. Where does it stand right now as far as the high school quarterback scene in the state of Utah and potential college players, maybe for one of the local schools we mentioned here?
Well, I got to be careful because the ego in me, guys that have been around quarterbacks and developing quarterbacks and focusing on quarterbacks. I think the guys like me in Utah, I want to yell as loud as I can to everybody that the best quarterbacks in the country are here in Utah, and I'm so dang proud of the quarterbacks here and the development they've had and how hard they've worked, because there were so many that were missed on, I think, years ago. And there were a handful of us out there that were saying, hey, you got to come and look at these QBs. I remember Ty Detmer, this was probably, 8 years ago. We did a camp, and Jaron Hall was, I think, a sophomore, junior. Zach Wilson was right in that age. There were a couple other guys that were right there that were young. And I remember him saying that there were kids at that camp that had they been out in Texas, he said these kids would have had looks. They would have had offers by now. And he was impressed. And he, coming from Texas, he was impressed with the talent of the kids in Utah. And I think now, because of the success of some of these quarterbacks who have gone, obviously the group that's come out of Corner Canyon the last couple of years, but there's been some other ones. I think Maddox Madsen going up and doing well at Boise State, and we've obviously brought what Bryson Barnes did, having been a kid from a small school that no one really knew about, and playing well in the Rose Bowl and different things. I think we've shown that there is good quarterback play here, and coaches know it. I think that around the country, Utah is a place now where you don't just come here to try to find big, defensive, offensive linemen and linebackers, but we actually have some skill players out here, and specifically quarterbacks and kids who work really hard to do it. So there are some good players coming up, and as you mentioned, from the Skyview High School, the northern part, all the way down to Desert Hills and far south, there are kids all the way up and down that are good players that I think can go and can benefit from going to a school like Weber and Utah Tech. And the question is, will they recruit those kids? Because I've said this forever. I still believe it to be true. I think there's too much that goes on. Maybe it's the sexy pick for a school to say that they got a kid from California. It sounds like you found some kid, right?
Right.
We found this. He's from Texas. Wow, he must be really good then. And where it's not if he's a local kid, but yet our local kids continue to show that they're good enough. And so, I do think with the coaching we have in Utah, I know Morgan Scalley knows that. I know Kalani knows that. They're not going to miss on a Utah kid. Will those second-tier schools miss? I think they will, because they want to show they can recruit out of the country. I hope they won't. They'll just stay locally. Morgan, by the way, man, Morgan Scalley, I've known him for 20 years, and I know I changed topics here, but Morgan, I don't think that Utah could have found, if they had looked everywhere in the country and had a chance to interview everybody in the country, I don't know if they could have found a guy a better fit for the future University of Utah. He and Kalani, it kind of reminds me of the start of what I think will be the good old days with Ron McBride and Lavelle Edwards, and that healthy rivalry and the friendship and how kids just loved playing for both guys. Morgan and Kalani, what a heck of a place to be in in Utah college football now with the head coaches at all of the schools. It's the football is as good as it's ever been here, college wise and high school wise. It's awesome to see.
So Dustin, now the Corner Canyon's out, you want to handicap 6A football for us? No, well, they're not out. Football. I should say they're out now that their coach is out. I mean, who's to say, right?
Yeah. Look, 6A football when I say 6A football, there's about 4 schools. Mm-hmm. It seems like there's 4 schools in 6A, and then there's 3 or 4 in 5A, and then everybody else is scrambling. But it's Corner Canyon, Sky Ridge, Lone Peak, Davis is always hanging around there. But it's primarily those schools, I think, and Lehigh is always going to be a good school. In the 5A ranks, it bounces around a little bit, but you never know because of how many kids bounce around and transfer now. So, that's the unfortunate part, I think, about high school football in Utah is the transfer game is out of control, and it really is hurting a lot of schools, and a lot of the smaller town schools are really paying the price for the way that kids bounce around in Utah. And it's not as crazy in other states as it is in Utah. And, everybody I know it's a sensitive topic for people but for a lot of schools in Utah, it's hard. And for the schools at the top, these kids who come in and they're always going to be there. They're always going to be tough. The Corner Canyon's always going to be at the top of that. They're the Mount Rushmore of players and offenses, and so it'll still be Sky Ridge, Lone Peak, Corner Canyon. I'd like to see Bingham get back in there. I like the way they used to play that just physical run over you football. And Davis, man, that Davis High School, they've been throwing the ball around really well, so you got to keep your eye out for them. But Corner Canyon, Sky Ridge, Lehigh, Lone Peak, those are your 6A teams. Pretty much 3 of the 4 will be in the semis every year. You can just book it.
Yep. Dustin, we appreciate the time as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Okay,
Dustin Smith, founder of QB Elite and Spanish Fork High School head football coach. When we come back, everything you missed in this show, next.